Well, guys, as Tony kind of alluded to, he's been gone this week to what Evie called preacher camp. So he, instead of taking the whole week to prepare a sermon, he sentenced you to me. So, so I'm going to talk to you this morning. I'm really grateful to have a chance to talk to the church. It's a humbling thing to speak to the church. I don't take it lightly, and I want you to know how much I appreciate it. As I was preparing for this message, it kind of took me back to my boyhood. I thought as I was a young lad, there were several jobs that I had, and I love having a job. I retired in 2018 from one job and went to another one, which I absolutely love, driving a school bus now. But anyway, when I was young, I think around 11, I had a paper route. Columbus Citizen Journal. Anybody remember the Columbus Citizen Journal? Morning paper. I don't think there are hardly any newspapers left anymore. But Columbus Citizen Journal was a morning paper. Every morning I would go up to the Croton restaurant. The house I was raised in was kind of right behind the Croton restaurant. And so at 6:30 in the morning, I would go up to the restaurant. Through the night, a route driver would come through and drop off bundles of papers at different locations, Johnstown, wherever. And my bundle was put at the Croton restaurant on the front stoop. I got 40 papers every morning, 6 days a week. I had 35 customers, and then 5 of those papers went in the restaurant on the counter with a money can. So if anyone went to the restaurant, wanted to have a paper, they could get it. My dad bought me a real nice Schwinn bike. Put big baskets on the back of it. It had a headlight and a horn, two D-cell batteries in the middle there, and ran the headlight and the horn. He put some big reflectors on the back of those baskets because there was one stop that I had, Paul and Thelma Martin. They lived out as you're coming out of Croton, past the fire station and down the hill. Their house is now gone, but they were the last driveway on the right as you leave Croton. And Dad always said people drive crazy going out of town, so I had those big reflectors so they could see me out there at Paul Martin's house. Well, anyway, with 35 customers, I'd load those baskets with my papers, and I'd go on my route. And then after school, I would go back to the restaurant, and the way that I didn't have to pay for those papers that didn't sell, where it said Columbus Citizen Journal across the top, I cut that out. And at the end of every month, on my paper bundle, there would be a bill with an envelope for me to send the money in to the Citizen Journal for the papers I had received that month. But the ones that didn't sell, I would cut out that heading, stick those in the envelope, and I didn't have to pay for them. But here's the fun part. The Croton restaurant was owned by Hoyt and Ethel Crow. Ethel was a kind of a large lady, very jovial, just wonderful. And her husband, Hoyt, he waited the counter, she did the cooking. Well, after school, I would go down to get those papers. And in the back corner of the restaurant was an RC machine. 10 cents. 10 cents, huh? Yeah, I was born in 1956. I said that one day on my bus, and a kid said, 19? Yeah. So anyway, the RC bottles, if you remember, big RC bottle, and they weren't exactly round. They were kind of angled at the top. Anyway, 10 cents, and I would go up to the counter, and I'd sit there and get my papers and cut out that. Well, Mrs. Crow took a liking to me. And every day, if she had any left, she'd put a donut under the counter. And I'd sit down, and she'd come out, and she'd say, "Hi, Donnie, how are you?" I said, "Good, Mrs. Crow." And she'd reach under there and pull that donut out. So I'd have a donut and a 10-cent RC. Well, then, after my paper route, I mowed yards. just a little push mower, pushed it all over town. If there was a widow in town, I pretty much mowed her yard. But all the widows, including my grandmother, they kind of hung out together. And they had a club called the IDKDY. Anybody know what that is? I had no idea. So one day I said to my grandma, I said, "What's the IDKDY club?" She said, "I don't know, do you?" I said, "Well, no, that's why I asked you." "Well, what is it?" She said, "I don't know, do you?" Well, this went on for a few times, and finally I was getting frustrated. I said, "Grandma, what is it?" She said, "I don't know, do you?" "Oh, it's a gossip club. You know, they all run around and come up to date on things, and I get it." Well, anyway, I would mow their yards. $4, $5 to mow a big yard with a push mower. But some of my favorites, Susie Van Fossen was one of my favorites. I would go to her house and mow her yard, and she'd come out with the money, and a lot of times she'd bake bread. And she'd come out with a piece of homemade bread that thick on a plate, slathered in butter, sugar, cinnamon. Oh, I just wad that up, stuff it in. I looked like a chipmunk. It was so good. And then right next door to her was Mrs. Williams. Mrs. Williams baked cookies all the time. And they were cookies, you know. I mean, big, thick, beautiful chocolate chip cookies. Esther Buell lived up the other end of town. Esther was actually a secretary at the school when I was there. And I mowed her yard. And she was always good for something cold to drink. Pop, whatever, iced tea, whatever, Kool-Aid. And then I had, of course, my grandma's house. Well, at grandma's, I just kind of help myself, you know. Whatever you want, Donnie. So a lot of times I'd win grandma's and she had frozen waffles. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I'd get frozen waffles out, plop them in the toaster, and sit there and eat 4 or 5 frozen waffles. And then here's what brought me to today. My last job, I ran trap lines. Any of you, Steele, you're a very energetic young man. You ever trap? Tom, you did? Trap lines, I used the same bicycle that I used for my paper route because I could put all my traps in the baskets and the stakes that I used to stake them. And I'll show you here in a minute. And I would ride, there were 2 or 3, 4 different ponds around Croton that were within bike range. And a muskrat in particular will destroy a pond. Because what they do, they'll go in, they go under the water and they burrow until they come up above water line. And that way any predators that are after them, they can swim in there and go up in that tunnel into a nice dry spot. The problem with that is it's maybe 4 or 5 feet from the edge of the water. So you'd be walking along or, you know, farmer out mowing, and all of a sudden the tractor drop in a hole. Well, it was that, just that little bit of dirt that covered that hole that muskrat had made. They'll destroy a pond. So some of the people that had ponds were just tickled to death that I'd want to trap them. Muskrats back then, and you have to understand the fur industry now is pretty much gone. Nobody wears a mink coat anymore. Muskrats paid about $3 each. And the guy that bought my fur, he didn't want me to skin them, which is fine, because as you well know, if you start bleeding, you're on your own. So he said, when you catch something, just put it in the freezer. Put it in a bag, put it in the freezer, I'll buy it. And he'd skin them himself and put them on a stretcher board. Muskrats were $3. Raccoons went anywhere from 8 to 12. Good money, you know, back in 1967, somewhere in there. And if you're fortunate enough to get a mink, 25 or 30 bucks for a mink. Boy, I loved getting a mink. So that's what brought me to this. Tony's always so good about naming his messages. I titled this one, The Trappings of Sin. Okay? I'll show you something. Here's some of my wares. The traps. I wanted to talk to you about the trappings of sin today. And I got a good lesson in sin yesterday when I went to Dollar General to buy a pack of mouse traps. I didn't have any mouse traps at home. I wanted a nice clean one. So I go to Dollar General to buy a pack of mouse traps. And when I picked it up, guess what happened? They fell out the bottom. And I look and I'm like, well, that says 4 mouse traps. There's only 3. Somebody had already cut the bottom and stolen a mouse trap. Talk about the trappings of sin. I had firsthand. I walked up to the counter and the girl said, hey, they fell out on the counter. She said, you want a different pack? I said, no, that's perfect. Go right along with my message. I didn't tell her that, but go right along with my message. Now, a mouse trap. That's the kind of trap that you bait. Everybody knows, you used to say, put cheese on the mouse trap. What do you bait it with? Peanut butter. Everybody knows peanut butter is the thing now. So you put peanut butter on a mouse trap. Now, that mouse, for me, that mouse trap might be nothing. It's just a little tiny thing, means nothing. And that's the way we are, isn't it? Isn't that the way we are with sin? Think of how you look at sin. It's the way I do. I look at sin in degrees, I guess. Well, I've never done that. I've never been that bad. I never killed anybody or any of that, So I look at things in kind of in degrees. So I look at that mousetrap and I think, it's nothing. And I look at maybe some of my little sins in life, and Satan has convinced me, that's nothing. That is so inconsequential, Don. You don't even have to ask forgiveness for that one. It's crazy. So I dance around that little sin, nothing to it. When all of a sudden, I shouldn't have done that. But that really meant nothing. It stung a little. Okay. But to me, I can go on. That little sin, like I said, I don't even have to ask forgiveness. But think about the mouse. You ever seen a mouse from one of them? He's absolutely done. So it's Satan can convince us that's nothing. Okay? I don't know what Satan can bait the trap with on you. I don't, there's a lot of things in life don't interest me at all. And he knows that. He can't entice me with certain things. But with certain things, he can. So he knows how to bait a trap. And so, you fall into a small sin that Satan tells you means nothing. And as a matter of fact, he'll never bring it up again. He'll never mention it to you again. It was nothing. Forget it. Okay? So, the second degree of sin. Now we're getting a little more serious. This is a leg hold trap. A leg hold trap you don't bait. Here's how a leg hold trap works. A leg hold trap works with repetitious behavior. The muskrats, as they would go into a pond, they'd make what we call a slide. They'd go up and down and up and down and up and down into the pond, the same place all the time. Till finally, they had pretty much a mudslide into that pond. So you knew exactly where they were going in and out. And so, with that repetitious behavior, I knew where to set a trap. You got any repetitious behaviors? Huh. Yeah. Yeah. Or look around. Are you sitting in the same seat you were in last week? Yep. Yeah. The same one you've been in for 3 years? Yep. You know, we're going to the Texas Roadhouse. I'm having ribs. I go to Wendy's, number 6, spicy chicken with mayonnaise only. Go to McDonald's, number 2, best breakfast in the world. Number 2 with unsweetened iced tea. See, I can go on and on and on. I go to the certain Mexican restaurant, Chinese restaurant. I know exactly what I'm getting by number because that's my behavior. You know, I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I go out and start my bus at 6:20. I leave the house at 6:50. I pick up my first kid out on Sycamore Road at 7:07. And I have a great big clock on my dash because I don't like to be late. I'm one of those weirdos that when you say, come over to our house and we'll eat supper at 6, I get there at 4:45. And she'll say, drive around a little bit. Because I don't want to be rude. You know, if you said we're going to eat at 6, I always thought, well, I shouldn't show up at 6. I guess, hey, we got an amen. I'll be there. What time? So anyway, it's repetitious behavior that we can get into. And then that's what the muskrats did. Repetitious behavior. Now, you might ask, what kind of an idiot would stick his finger in a mousetrap just to prove a point? Well, this idiot isn't going to stick one in the leg hold trap. All right? See what it does? It grabs that muskrat or coon or whatever it was by the leg and holds him there. Now, this chain, I had big long stakes that I would drive in the bank of the pond. And a lot of times when it would grab their legs, they couldn't move and they'd roll over into the water and drown. I know. Can't believe you ever had a jerk like that, Don. That's not the half of it. If they were still alive, I had a little snare thing that I'd put around them, squeeze them real tight, and drown them. You know, better than clubbing them. Anyway, they get their leg caught like that. And do you know how many times I've gone to one of these traps and found a leg? A muskrat will chew his own leg off right there at that knuckle to get away. Time and time and time again, I've gone out to my trap lines and I had a leg. Well, the fur buyer doesn't buy legs. They buy fur. So, it's repetitious behavior. Now, I just told you how much repetitious behavior I have. Satan can track that. Oh, Don, I know that you. It's our repetitious behavior that allows a trap to work. And Satan sets up a trap for us, just like he did with Adam and Eve. He says to Adam and Eve, oh, surely, God didn't say you'd surely die, did he? Hey, are you certain? He might have said that you might die. Not that you will surely die. And they thought, well, yeah, you ever done that game around the table where you tell something, and by the time it gets to the end, it's all out of whack? Well, Adam and Eve might have thought, well, yeah, maybe he did just say we might die. So, like a muskrat, what are you willing to cut off? What are you willing to cut off? If you're sick and tired, for the last 6 weeks, the preacher has beat us over the head with I am. And Tony, I love that. I've learned so much from some of the series that he's doing. But if you're to the point where I don't want to hear it anymore, what are you willing to cut off? Church? Look around. Why isn't this place packed full? And I've had that question asked to me. I can't understand why this place isn't full. I don't know. Because the world doesn't want to hear it. We come in here and we've got a great preacher. I'm not just because he's my son-in-law. And I'd tell him if he wasn't. We've got a great preacher. We've got a great group of people. We've got a great spirit here. The reason this church has survived is because of some of you sitting right over here. Prayed for this church. You've attended this church. You've supported this church. And this church functions today because of you. But people don't want to hear it. What do you want to cut off? Not your leg, but I can cut off church. Or this. I can cut off reading my Bible. Because you know what it says? Thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. When does it tell me to have some fun? It keeps saying, thou shalt not. Why do we tell our kids, thou shalt not? For their own good. For their own good. Got to tell you one quick story. My mom and dad, I've been to my girlfriend's house one night. I had a beautiful 72 Nova. Oh, that thing was unreal. Krager mags, the whole works. I've been to my girlfriend's house, and I was due home at midnight. Well, I lived in Croton, about a mile out of Croton, actually, by that time. And we'd sold the house uptown. Well, I was at my girlfriend's house in Alexandria. And all of a sudden, it was 11 minutes till midnight. Well, in the Nova I went. Now, from Alexandria to Johnstown, when I got to Johnstown, I still had about 6 minutes. So does that tell you anything? So I come out of Johnstown and around the first couple curves where you can see that long straight stretch clear to the mill. Well, there's two little taillights 4 miles down there, and I thought, there's no way that's a cop. No way that's a cop. I'm running about 105 miles an hour. And those taillights are getting closer and closer and closer. And all of a sudden, as I go out in this lane, it's my mom and dad's station wagon. Whoa! Too late. Too late. Why do we tell our kids, don't do that? For their own good. You know how quick, how easy I could have been killed? That's stupid. That's just stupid stuff. And when I got home, I pulled in the driveway. I thought, here we go. My dad was a big man. If you didn't, none of you knew my dad, but he was back in his day. He was a big man, big shoulders, big everything. And he got out of that car, and you could tell he was ready. He walked up to me and just held his hand out. I dropped the keys in there, and he said, "That's 3 weeks. Don't touch it." I wax my car every day. He said, don't even touch it. Because he realized after he had told me that I was willing to cut off his advice, cut off his worry, cut off whatever I needed to do what I wanted to do. Now this second trap that I've just shown you, after I told you all that, this second trap can lead you down a path of even doubting your salvation. Was I ever saved? You ever been around somebody like that? We have been. we knew a couple years back. The lady was very legalistic. The background that she had in church and so on, and it was like she was waiting every minute to do something wrong, and God was going to nail her. It's like, man, I'd hate to live like that. Because God says, I'll forgive. You ask, I'll forgive. But she had the idea that if I do one thing wrong, he's going to get me. And she lived in fear like that, didn't she? Was I ever really saved? Did I ever do what I... This is when you are the most vulnerable. When you start doubting God, doubt yourself all you want. When you start doubting God, that God has saved me, that God has given me His promises, that God has sent His Son to die for me, all these things that God has done, and then you start doubting. So, that's when you're vulnerable. That's when Satan can move in. And he can start saying, well, you can get out of that. Like I said, you can quit reading your Bible. You can quit going to church, listen to the preacher. You can quit whatever you do. You can get out of that. So, lastly, I want to show you the one you don't get out of. I didn't even bring this thing out front because it is so lethal. I didn't want it to be around anybody. This is called a conibear trap. Now don't let the name fool you. It has nothing to do with a bear. If a bear got in that thing, he'd probably just laugh. But when you put an animal in there like a mink or a raccoon, something of that nature, they are instantly done. See that little wire in the middle? How this trap worked, when I would find a slide and I couldn't seem to trap that animal no matter what I did, I'd find these holes. And I'd stick this down over the entrance to the hole. Now in a murky pond, they can't see those wires. And that muskrat, he'd go down that slide and go around there and find his hole. And when he did, if I can... Believe me, they're done when that goes off. And believe me, your fingers are too when that thing goes off. But here's where Satan... Now, I didn't mention that. I didn't even mention that, Don. I said you could get out of that. Now, I've got you. Here's where Satan can make hay at your expense. Because now, how could you be such a screw-up? How could you do something like that against God, who's done everything for you, and you pull that? God doesn't want anything to do with you. He doesn't want to talk to you. He doesn't want to hear your lousy prayers. He doesn't want to see you. He wants no part of you because you did that. That's how I look at sin. I'm sorry. I mentioned my grandma before. I'll never forget watching the news. She never missed 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news. And I remember sitting there and they'd had these guys that committed awful crimes. And her big thing was, well, just line them up and shoot them. Line them up and shoot them. I got to say, I kind of have that in me. You know, when I see some of the things that go on in this world and some of the heinous crimes that people can commit against other people, I think, you're a waste of breath. Praise God, He didn't think that about me. When Satan says God doesn't want anything to do with you, yes, He does. Okay? John 3:16. That's all you got to know. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever, Jeffrey Dahmer went to prison after cutting people up and eating them. And he said, I found Christ in prison. And I hope someday that I see Jeffrey Dahmer. Because I want to know that he was sincere about changing his life, giving his heart to the one who could and would forgive him. I wouldn't have. That's that. The shootings that have happened at schools, I wouldn't forgive those people. I don't want to get into politics, but that's just the way it is. And so my forgiveness sometimes is based on degrees, just like my sin. I look at some of my sins as, well, that's, yeah. But boy, this other one, and it's the same way with forgiveness. So that's the way God works. Why would you ever turn your child over to someone else? That's the way God feels about us. Why would he turn us over to Satan? As rotten and no good as we can be, he still wants us. He still wants us to be his. He still wants us to be in eternity with him, no matter how bad we've been. So, what you got to say is, God, I've screwed up. I've done things like that. I've done things like that. And things like that. But you ask him. God, you clear those out from in front of me, will you please? You clear those traps that Satan's setting for me. And what's that going to do? Give me a clear path to you.